All right, family. I want to definitely protect your time tonight. I have so much to share, so I pray that I have whittled it down to what it is that God would have us to share with you. But let's pray, and then we are going to go right into the journey. So, Heavenly Father, we love you. Father, we thank you for the blessings of who you are, how sweet you are, how generous you are in all of your ways. Father, thank you for what it is that you permitted Kendra and I to do, to be able to go to Israel during a season like this, a time like this, when they are hurting just so very much. Father, would you anoint this time? Would you give me the words to speak that will glorify your great name, that will say all your good pleasure, and that I would express your heart that you have given to Kendra and I. Please be with us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Now, when I say to you, as the deer pant for the water brook, what image pops into your head? What is the image that goes in your head when I say that? Because for the longest time, this is what it was for me. Cute little deer, forest setting, sitting there drinking at the brook, but in reality, it's this. It is a rocky, unforgiving land. It would devour anybody who walked through it, and yet in the middle of all this, there's a spring. There's a beautiful, cool spring, crystal clear water, purified not by filters, but by the earth itself. And this is what sustains you in the middle of nowhere. This is what Israel was for us as we went out there. It is this kind of environment that we got to go into when we went to Israel this time. Now, when we got off the plane, we were as groggy as you might imagine. It's upside down. They're 7 hours ahead. So I see the brilliance of the planning, as it were, because as we got off the plane and we went to our first place, it was Caesarea Maritime, and it's gorgeous. You don't need brain power to understand the beauty of this place. Now, on this slide that you see up here before you, off in that distance there is Herod's palace, Herod the Great's palace. Now, what's so special about this particular location is that this is where Paul will be taken, that he will be tried, and he will be cast into the jail and eventually be put in house arrest for 2 years. It's this location here at Herod's palace. And that's neat, and you're looking at it, and that's awesome, and it's just gorgeous in every possible way. I mean, you're looking at that, and you're like, oh, I understand, Lord. I understand why you chose this land. Now, this is the Mediterranean coast. It's just gorgeous and beautiful. And as we're walking around there, we see this couple who's dating. Now, if you see that red arrow, it's kind of a little hard to make out. But that red arrow is pointing to a rifle. These two young people were in the army. They're out there on a date just trying to enjoy some time together, but even when they're off duty, they still have to be armed. This is the reality of what it is that we went into. But as you look there, what you'll start to see is something else missing. There's no people. We went about 3 days before we saw another tour group. The vast majority of churches canceled their trips during this particular time. For good reasons, I don't blame any of them. It never occurred to Kendra and I to go, we're not going to go during this time. God kind of gave us this heart where we understood that we could not go. We simply had to be there. But there's a reality to the situation there on the ground, and we came face to face with it in the first day at Hostage Square. Now, in Tel Aviv, there is an entire square in front of a museum where they have all the pictures of everyone who's still missing, that are unaccounted for. Inside of this square are people that they have been there for the 100+ days since the October 7th attack happened, and they're going to stay there until everyone from their particular village comes back. And there's these little tents and whatnot on the inside of it. But inside this location is a clock, just ticking, second by second, detailing what it is that their country is going through. The reality of it, just how heartbreaking it is. And inside of it is this long table made for Shabbat. The Sabbath meal, the dinner that you spend with your family, and there's places set for everyone who's missing. But if you look at that one there on the left, you see how the place settings are all weird? Because that's what the hostages get to eat. It's little pieces of flour tortilla. The water you see is discolored because that's the water that they're getting. And you see the high chair for the little kids that are gone. This is the reality of the country, the hurting country that we went into, where nobody else was, where we were one of the very few groups at all. And especially from America, we only saw one other group that might have been from America. We're not even totally sure, but they could have been. But as we were wandering around, we were in Joppa, and then our tour guide, while we were sitting there having a beautiful Bible study, he sends out this message, and I don't know if you can read the print up there or not, but it says, the Americans are back. The Americans are back. This is what it meant to them, because there was nobody there. Nobody pouring into the people, loving on the people, but worse yet, what they're seeing on the news are schools and groups inside of America, not only on the other people's side, as it were, but discounting it, whether it even happened, calling them liars, saying if it really was as they proclaim it to be, now where are all these other people to speak about? And the reality is that a lot of those people are missing or they're dead. This is the country we went into, and I want you to keep this image and this idea over your head. This is what it means to support Israel, to love them, to bless those who bless Israel. And this is what you got to be a part of. Because it wasn't just Kendra and I, like we had some supernatural gifting that you guys didn't have. Because what we continually ran into and over again while we were there was this understanding that it is because of what God did through all of you that allowed us to be a part of that group. And we were going to places where they hadn't seen anybody since October 7th. So when we showed up, they all got excited and started yelling at people to come out, people are here. And you were a part of that. You helped support that. You poured into them and loved them from afar. So as we went through that day and a lot of overload, especially with Hostage Square, the next day we got to go to Mount Carmel. Now the first day was really interesting. It was neat. That was beautiful, gorgeous to see the Med Coast. It just abruptly shocking to our hearts to see Hostage Square. But then on the next day, I'm kind of like, you know what? I'm not super excited. And I'm worried about that because I've been longing to go to Israel for years. So, okay, maybe I just got to kind of get past this. Everything's all modern. I'm looking at hotels and air conditioning and cars, and everybody's smoking cigarettes. And I'm like, they didn't smoke in the Bible. What is everyone smoking cigarettes here for? And then we went to Mount Carmel. Now, Mount Carmel is a chain of mountains. And on one particular location on it, they kind of had a flat enough spot. They built a church and said, okay, this is where it was. This is where Elijah had this wonderful showdown with the prophets of Baal. And they got this neat little statue, and it's very Catholic and Franciscan monks on it and stuff like that. And okay, well, that's neat. It's very pretty. But when you go up here, there's an observation deck. Now, this was the neat thing. And that gentleman who's talking over there in the blue blazer is Andre. He was our guide. He was fantastic. He's an Arab Christian who grew up in Nazareth. His family goes back like 400 years in Nazareth. This is a really neat story. He's an amazing individual. But this is where it began to click for us. Because as he's talking and we're looking out over this valley, that's the Valley of Megiddo. That's where Armageddon is going to happen. And as we're standing there and we're looking over this entire valley, the ongoing thought is, that's where he's coming back, right there. And it's not just anywhere, it could be anywhere in this valley. It is literally in this location right here. Now, it's really hard to see, but right here in this little area, there's an air base for the Israeli Air Force. It's underground because they're expecting an invasion at any point, because this particular location is the only place in the chains, the mountain chains right there, where you can attack them from the north and reinforce it from the Navy from the Mediterranean Sea. It is the only battlefield for it, and it is the oldest battlefield in the history of the earth. It has more battles at it than anywhere else. It is the location where Napoleon stood in that place and said, this is the most perfect battlefield in the world, and that's where he's coming back, and we're coming back with him. And everything just became vivid in that moment. Suddenly, everything makes sense, and the excitement and the joy of that moment began, and it was just awesome. That is the first place where I just said, this is home, because it connects to you in that moment. These aren't stories anymore. And as much as we love the Bible, and we love the Bible, but we worship the God of the Bible, and this is one of those places where it reaches out of the page and it just grabs you. So coming out of that, we're all excited. We're coming down the mountain. And as I'm looking around, I'm reminded of this old joke/Jewish legend. All right, the Jews have this story that at the beginning of creation, and God's getting the world ready, he takes all the rocks he's going to put in the world, and he gives all the rocks to two angels. He goes, go and spread them throughout the earth. And so the first angel goes, and he's being very faithful. He's putting rocks a little bit everywhere so that it all gets done. And the second angel goes to Israel and dumps all the rocks right there. And I've heard that joke before. And then I saw it. Like Kendra got so annoyed with me going, look at all the rocks. There's just rocks everywhere. But you're looking at it, and we get to a place that there's more rocks than there is grass. And I'm like, what are the cows eating? Because there's so many rocks. But there are rocks everywhere. But it adds a whole new rich dynamic to the situation, to the land itself. Now, as we went down, we went to Nazareth, which was really, really neat. Now, when you go to Nazareth, you kind of have this idea of this sleepy Jewish town. After all, what good can come out of Nazareth, right? It's a little backwater. But it is so modernized now because guess where all the Christians are going? They're all going to Nazareth. And Nazareth has the highest percentage of Christians for any city in Israel right now. And it was a really neat place. I was telling Billy just a little bit ago when we went to Nazareth because no one else is there. We're the only ones. But the welcoming, the hospitality, and the harmony of the people, we're walking by, and all these little kids are coming out of school, and they don't have school buses running. Like you see little kids, 6-year-old kids, walking through Jerusalem from school by themselves. No parents, no cross guards, no nothing, just navigating the world. But these little kids are coming up to us and going, "Shalom, welcome. We're so glad to have you." And it was really neat to be welcomed in that way. We're walking through the crowds, and we go to this church, the Church of the Annunciation, which... church tradition, I'm going to start to use some phrases, and I'll explain in a minute. Church tradition believes that this church is built over the house of Mary in the city of Nazareth. And it is here that Luke says, when Luke tells us that the angel went to go talk to her, he went to Nazareth. And this is that location. Now, this is one of the places of struggle with me, and I need to explain this to you. Because when you look at this, and you see this church, and you see, and I'm just going to be honest with you, the Mary iconography everywhere. There's pictures of Mary, and every once in a while, she's holding a baby Jesus, and a lot of times she's not. And we struggle. And we struggle a lot. And we're like, why would you build this idolatry shrine over this location if it is the house of Mary? This is something, if you've never traveled outside of the States, I need you to start to understand this just a little bit. Your Western point of view is not all there is to the world. And it is your selfishness that would cause you to look at that and immediately condemn anybody who could get joy out of that place. Understand this, for the majority of the history since Jesus walked the earth, most people could not read. And everything you did in the gospel message in order to hand it down to them, it had to be in a medium that they could enjoy, that they could receive from, something that would teach them to lift their eyes off of just the ruggedness of their life in front of them. But here's the other thing. In that area of the world, oral tradition is sometimes all you have. It's still very much present in several places within Africa, where one person within a village would be assigned the responsibility to be the storyteller for the town, to keep the stories, the history, and everything going on. So for them, the oral tradition is extremely important. And we see this with Judaism as well. Little boys being taught how to recite entire books of the Bible, because that's how they handed it down, father to son, and so forth. Beautiful, powerful in so many ways. And the reason why this matters in church history is going back all the way to the 1st century, the time of Jesus. They can find signs that the early church kept a house church there. And they believe it's because they believed it to be the house of Mary. That this is where Gabriel came to her. And this is the area-ish that they brought Jesus back to. Somehow in the middle of all this built-up modernness, this is where he grew up. On the inside of it, you see this kind of almost like helter-skelter church. There's stuff all over here. Right over here is a cave. Now, what we learned from our guide who grew up in Nazareth is that the nickname for Nazareth was City of Caves because there are caves everywhere. So when you built a house, you built it on top of a cave, and the cave kind of became your basement cellar place. In this area, they found mosaics and a 1st century baptismal pool where they would baptize people. So regardless of whether this was the house of Mary or not, it was important to the early church, which was really neat for us. But here's the thing I really liked in Nazareth. This is a Crusader church. At the times the Crusaders came, and they moved in. They're coming after the Byzantines. They're coming after the Muslims had been there. This is the location and the exact footprint of a Jewish synagogue. This is the location of the synagogue within Nazareth. And guess who went to the synagogue in Nazareth? Guess who got kicked out of church in the synagogue in Nazareth? And we got to be in there. We got to stand in the place where when he went and he taught and he got kicked out, we got to stand in the same place, because the way that the layout is, you only go in one way and you only come out one way. And it was so sweet and it was so pure to be able to be in that spot. And it's areas like that, because when you're in there, it doesn't feel modern. There's no electrical outlets. That floodlight has a line going out a little hole they put in the wall so they could run it. So it's not modern when you go in there. It feels so sweet and so old. The next day, we got to go to the Sea of Galilee, which is just gorgeous. It is so amazing, so neat. You see that mountain range way off in the distance. It's one of the areas of it, I couldn't stop looking at it. It's Mount Arbel. Tradition holds that this is where Jesus went to give the disciples the Great Commission. The reason they believe that, it's the highest peak in the area that still has a view of the Sea of Galilee. So when he told them to go there and to give it to them, they believe, tradition holds that that is where he met with them. Some scholars also believe there's a Mount of Beatitudes here. It's a beautiful area. But some scholars think that this may also be where he gave the Sermon on the Mount. Because where they believe, they have the church now for the Mount of Beatitudes and the Church of Beatitudes, he goes, if you tore down the building, it's a plain up top. And that plain is likely where he did the sermon on the plain that we have in another gospel. But either way, this is what's unique about the area. And this is something only Jesus as creator would know. That when you stand on these high places with the Sea of Galilee right there, so you're standing it and the crowd's there and then the Sea of Galilee's behind them, your voice, the natural volume, gets increased 33 times. 33 times. You could speak to thousands from that location and not need a mic. It's almost like someone created it that way. It was just amazing to be up there. We got to go on the cruise to go on to the Galilee. There's a video of us doing a Jewish dance, which, Lord willing, you will never see, but it was a lot of fun to be there. But because we were the only boat out there, they said they had one other tour that day, like several hours later. They took us out there, and we just got to be out there. Just be there, have beautiful Bible study. It was so sweet. And this is our group that was all together here as we're out there on that Jesus cruise. But never too far from your mind is this, pictures of those. And wherever we went would be these pictures, and it would say, bring him back now, bring her back now, bring them back now. As we're leaving the Sea of Galilee heading towards Capernaum, we're driving by the side of the road, and they go, all right, get your cameras ready, because we're going to go by it real fast. There's no place to stop. These are first century tombs. These are tombs that the early church would have dug for themselves so they could be close to the place where Jesus had so much of his ministry. And these are just holes in the wall, but you see the size of that stone, and you think to yourself, you know what, I understand why the ladies are going, who's going to roll that stone out of the way for us? Because it's big enough to be an issue. But those holes right there are places where they would have put the body and allowed them to decompose. But after this, we got to go to Capernaum. Now, it's neat to be in the place. It is highly built up. And there's only one thing to really see other than the Sea of Galilee there, and it is Peter's house. Now, here's the neat thing. They're able to, by the brilliance of archaeology and what they're doing, they can go back all the way to the time of Jesus and find the foundation stones and tell you this is the exact blueprint of his house. But there's elements to it that people that are more scholarly than I can look at it and understand how it works. And what you have inside of this, you have an inner circle and then an outer circle. That inner circle is the house church. It's a courtyard that was naturally built into your house. So if you go into homes out in the southwest where you have a house built around a courtyard, and that courtyard would kind of be protected from the sun, it's the same kind of idea for a similar environment. And we got to see that portion of it, and that's kind of cool. Just getting past the church on top of it is built like a big flying saucer was a little bit disruptive, but it was like, okay, well, that's cool. But then we got to go to Magdala. Now, here's the neat thing. You see all this stuff in the background, right, like giant windows? They were building a hotel there. They knew that it was Magdala, but they were building a hotel. But anytime you go and you dig in Israel, you have to bring out archaeologists to come and check. So as they're building down, they run into a stone wall, and they're like, what is this? And they keep digging, and guess what they find? A synagogue to the time of Jesus. Now, here's one of the really neat things for us. We're standing there with Andre, our tour guide, in that day, and it was a beautiful day. And he's like, it does not say in the Bible that Jesus came to Magdala, but Mary Magdalene. Why would he go and he call her and save her and free her and not go to her town? It's so close to Capernaum. If so much of his ministry is in this area, it only makes sense. And when you look at it, one of the neat things that I came to understand in that place, and they were like, here they blocked off the streets against the Romans, to keep them back. And I'm like, street? What's the street? It's like this wide. how dense everything is in the city, how close everything is, how tight the quarters are. And even the doorways are very, very close. And you're like, man, people were so much smaller. They clearly didn't have American diets because the two of us couldn't have walked by each other. But then he does this. If this is the courtyard or the doorway to walk in, he goes, and if Jesus came here and he puts his foot on the threshold, he goes, this is the exact place his foot was. I can tell you to within inches because when he walked through, there's only so much room. His foot had to touch this stone and this place to walk into that synagogue to teach. And it was just incredible to be able to be in that place and just be surrounded with first century history that day. After that, we went to one of the absolute highlights of the trip, Ner Etzion. Now we had four opportunities to do outreach and ministry and just to be able to contact people there. Some of them were very powerful. I won't talk about them tonight. But this was our favorite. Now, I want you to remember this concept. Aliyah. Say it. Aliyah. Aliyah means to go up. So when you see in the Bible that they went up to Jerusalem, the term is Aliyah. When Israel was founded, they wanted to create a home. Israel was created on this promise: never again. Never again. That all Jewish people will have a place to go to a home where they feel safe. And when you want to go and claim your right to go and live in Israel as an ethnic Jew, you make Aliyah. That's the term. These are Ethiopian Jews making Aliyah. They were located just north of Gaza when October 7th happened. One of the guys who was in there, we got to meet with, he was in the town. He was one of 3 people that had firearms inside of that town, trying to keep them safe from the horde that was coming across that Gaza line. Inside it's a hotel. They had to be completely removed. And so what they do is in these absorption centers is a lot of the people coming in don't know how to read Hebrew, write Hebrew, speak Hebrew. They don't know the customs, the things you need to do and learning about Shabbat. But here's what's so interesting about particularly the Ethiopian Jews that we got to meet with. Most of these people have never been in a house with electricity. They don't know how to live in a house with hot water. They have to be taught the difference between dishwasher soap and shampoo. Because where they came from, there was no difference. This is the reality of the situation where they were. But they were the most unbelievable, amazing, loving people. And what you learn is what you should already know. The kids, the world around are all the same. Now, do you want to tell them? Okay, all right. It was awesome being with the kids because they didn't know a lot of our Western ways. So like when, you go up to a little kid now and you go up and give me a high five, and they just give you a high five, right? They didn't know any of that stuff. So I'm like, give me a high five, and they're like, what? And so I kind of hit their hand. They're like, oh, we can slap hands, and they're just slapping everybody. It was awesome. Well, there was this beautiful little girl in a pink dress. She was so cute. She was so absolutely cute. She's, what we were doing was helping them create gifts during certain times of the year for the feast. What they have in the absorption centers, they take the kids and they prepare gifts for people that can't get out. And then these kids get to go and do that, and it helps them integrate with the area. And it was interesting because you see all these cards, and it's all in Hebrew, but all the little girls are putting hearts on everything, and it's just neat to see that. And Kendra was with one of the little girls, and she does the little symbol for the heart. And the kid was like, whoa, what are you doing? What is this magic that you do with your hands? And Kendra shows her, and then she just starts running and doing it to everyone. And we're in this place where they're just showing us hospitality. We're having the Ethiopian coffee, some of the oldest coffee, and their particular method that they do. And the little girl runs up to the window, and she right next to Kendra, and she does that against the glass, and then they go off running. It was unbelievable. It was so good. I'm firmly convinced if the only thing we got to do was play with those Ethiopian kids and love on them in Jesus' name, and we were stuck in a hotel for 8 days after, it would have been worth it. It was just fantastic. It was so good. After that, we go to Nazareth at sunset. Oh, it was amazing. But the neat thing is that I'm sitting there and I'm prayer journaling, and I'm looking out, and I'm looking at the hills that Jesus created and he played in as a little boy. He got to wake up in the morning and go play in the hills that he created at the beginning of the foundation of the earth. It was just awesome. After this, we went to Gideon Springs the next morning. Beautiful, quiet. We were the only ones there. Just gorgeous. But this is the Gideon Spring from the book of Judges, where they go to divide the army until they only have 300. It's a beautiful little spring coming out, but look at this. This is beautiful. This is absolutely beautiful. And this is in that northern Capernaum area, just gorgeous. So this is around the tribe of Naphtali, that portion given over to them. But it's beautiful and it's sweet. And the water, when you taste it, it is so clear and so cold. I think I was the only one from the group that was dumb enough to drink from it. But I drank from it, and it was really, really good. But it was so neat to be able to be in that location. After that, we went to Beth Shan. Now, Beth Shan's interesting because it's this huge archaeological find, going back to the time of the Greeks. You see that hill way up there? That's Mount Gilboa. That is the location when King Saul and the army was defeated, and him and his boys' bodies were hung up on the city. That's the hill. This is what Israel does. It's not a place, it's not a thing, it's not a sad event. You look at it and you're like, okay, well, on to the next thing. Come on, where's David? You get to be able to sit in that place and look at it and understand that is where the history happened. That is the exact place, and this is just the dynamics of what Israel does. It was a very powerful, a really, really neat place. After that, we start getting in the bus and traveling again, and look at just how green the hills are. It's just luscious. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts of Israel are. So often in my head, it's like desert and rocks, but there's gorgeous places to it, but there is also reality. That's the security fence in the West Bank. Now, when you're going through the West Bank, what we learned is that there's 3 security zones inside the West Bank. There's Zone A that's completely controlled by the Palestinian Authority. There's Zone B that is it is reinforced by the Israelites. And then there's Zone C that's, I think that's right, is more protected by them, so that's where the Jewish people within them are. We weren't able to go see any of the sites within the West Bank. It was simply too volatile, which breaks my heart because we didn't get to see Bethlehem. We didn't get to see Jacob's well. We didn't see Shechem or Mount Ebal or Gerizim. There were just places that were off limits to us, and that fence was a constant reminder of it. And what we learned is several portions of the fence were not just for the Palestinians or the Palestinian Authority or Hamas or anything like that. It's Jordan. Because Jordan, well, where that mountain range is in the background, you can kind of see the peak up there in the upper left. That's Jordan. And it is the ongoing reminder that the enemy is always at your door. As we headed south, the terrain begins to change. So we have some grass and some rocks. But then we come around this corner, and we get our first view of Jerusalem. And I tell you, I loved Israel. I loved every single part we went through. There's not some places I definitely don't want to live in, but there was something about Jerusalem. It just feels like home. It just feels like home. When you get there, it just makes sense. Beautiful and gorgeous, wide sweeping. You fall in love with it. And as we go, our first chance to kind of look at it is from this observatory on the Mount of Olives. And they do this for a reason. They want you to start to get a grip of what it is that you're seeing. But what you can't get past is you look in this video, you see all those tombs? Now, there's 3 cemeteries in that photo. Because that area, that valley between the two is important to Christians, to the Jews, to the Muslims, because they all believe that the end of days is going to happen here. Now, all these tombs that you see on this front end are on the Mount of Olives. That's the Jewish cemetery, because they believe, Zechariah, this is where the Messiah is coming, right? So they want to be as close to where his foot is going to land as possible. Between those two are the Christians, because we know that he's going to split the Mount of Olives. So we don't want our tomb on the mountain. He's going to split that thing in two. We want to be where he's going to walk. So he's in the space, but we're in the space between the two for the Christians that are buried there. Now, here's the thing. It's kind of hard to see, but right here in the middle is a Muslim cemetery, because they know he's coming back too. And they know that no good Jew will walk through a cemetery. So on the eastern gate, and how does salvation always go? It always comes from the east, going east, right? How do we get kicked out of the garden? Through the eastern gate. So he's coming back through the eastern gate. And they put a cemetery right there, like this will stop him. Right. But he's going to split and make a valley. And he's going to go all of the way in. Now, here is one of the realities of Jerusalem. It's amazing and it's beautiful, and it is steep. There is a lot of walking in Jerusalem. You're not riding around. There's a certain part of the city that when you look and see how they transport stuff, they do it by little, almost like riding lawnmower tractors. And they give you a honk, but they're coming, so it is your responsibility to get out of the way. But you're walking and you're moving through it, and this is the beginning from the Mount of Olives all the way down into Jerusalem, the path that Jesus would have taken. But from here we got to go into something special. the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, if you go in tour groups prior to, and I'm sure it was like this for you as well, you get a time slot to go into the garden, so they try to reserve it for you there. But it's loud everywhere around. There's groups everywhere around. They're waiting their turn. But we got to go into the garden, and we were the only ones. They had to open one of the churches just for us to get a chance to go in. I'll show you a picture of that here in a minute. Because there was nobody there. The Jews were all alone. But we got to go into the Garden of Gethsemane. And there's just something about being inside of that place, knowing that general area, I can't point to the exact tree, but that general area is where our Jesus he poured out his heart. The stress was so much that blood came out of his pores. And we got to have communion in it. Pastor Art with Faith Tabernacle from up in Maine. An amazing man of God. Beautiful, so funny, so enjoyable to be around. But he let us in communion. The majority of the pastors that we were with were all Calvary Chapel guys, so it was funny. Right? Because only Calvary Chapel guys would be like, yeah, war, let's go. But we had a couple of guys that weren't. And they were just fantastic. They were so good. And Pastor Art got to lead us in this moment. Just sitting there having communion in the garden and then go and find a quiet spot somewhere in it just for us to be able to spend. And they, again, because no one else was there was no groups, they let us stay almost to the point that we got kicked out of the garden 5 minutes to Shabbat, because at Shabbat they have to close it, and you're stuck there for 24 hours because no one's leaving it. But we got to spend that time in it, and there's Kendra in the garden. It was a beautiful time. We were so thankful to be able to have it. Right around here is the Church of All Nations. This stone is called the Stone of Agony. And again, I'm going to go back to that idea of tradition just a little bit. Now, from a Western mindset, we need facts, we need details. We try not to lean too heavy on tradition, especially as Americans, because we don't have this long-flowing tradition of millennia going back. You go to other places, you go to Far Eastern countries, or you go into Latin America, and you're going to find more of a holding on to traditions, the things handed down to your fathers, is very, very important, but we don't quite understand it as Americans. The tradition around this one that's been handed down to about the 2nd century is that this is the stone that Jesus prayed, wept, and sweated great drops of blood on. Now, I struggled with this because I went back and I looked in my Bible to make sure that I was thinking, I'm like, it doesn't say anything about a stone in this, about him sweating on it. So what is this nonsense? This is one of the areas where one of the guys that I'm praying that we get to meet up with again, his name was Elias. He did a beautiful job because he's an Arab Christian, born and raised in Jerusalem, going back centuries, and there was a lot of that. These are people that are tied to the land. So I'm asking him, I said, okay, Stone of Agony, what's the deal? Because my Bible doesn't say anything about it, so why is this thing going on with stone? He goes, we have research going all the way back to 600 AD, showing that belief in the early church, that there was a consensus on it, and many of them believe this particular thing. He goes, what we do in the Middle East and in this area is we don't believe that something as important as like that would have been forgotten so quickly. I'm like, 600 years? I can't remember where I put my keys yesterday, but and we're like, no, it's different for us. And this was something, and I want you to understand this thought, because this is something they said that was brilliant to me. The stones have memory. The stones have memory. To them, the land is not just the land. It's the lands that my father handed down, and their father handed down, and their fathers handed down. They're tied to it. It's so important to them. It matters so much. And he goes, we don't believe that they would have forgotten something that important that quickly. That this is the area. He goes, but this is the thing that you need to understand. And he was fantastic for us because he was lived several years in the West. He's a professor. He goes, this is the thing I need you to hold on to as Westerners. Whether this is the rock or not, whether it was a rock at all, you are closer to that location now than you have ever been in your life. Western Christian, get out of your own way. Don't be the one that gets choked on the fish bones and can't eat the fish. This is one of those places where the sons of this world are more shrewd than the sons of light, because we throw out the baby with the bathwater if it's not perfect enough for us, and we miss so many blessings of just being in that place. It was an amazing moment, and I was very thankful to Elias to give me a beautiful perspective and kind of shake me out of what it is that I was struggling with. Go to bed, get up the next morning, and there's a camel. Because you gotta go see a camel when you're in the Middle East. Now, if you look at this camel, it's chained. It's chained to the curb. It's just chained there. There's like nobody next to it. It's just chained there. You drive by, like, there's a camel, and you keep it moving, right? Hey, that's life in the Middle East. As we're going along, we see some shepherds with some sheep. It was real neat. You don't see it in this photo. I think it's off here, just off camera. But they had sheep herding dogs, and they had this little puppy, this tiny little puppy that was learning from its parents how to shepherd. It was really, really cool. But what's the one thing that you don't see anywhere in that picture? Grass. Nothing. I'm like, where are you taking these sheep, man? What are they going to eat? But do you understand now how desperately reliant the sheep are on the shepherd? Because if he doesn't know where you're going, the sheep aren't going to find it. There's no water, there's no grass, there's no shrubs even to eat. They are so desperately reliant upon the shepherd that if the shepherd doesn't know what he's doing, the entire flock is lost. We kept going south toward the end of the Dead Sea, and we see Masada, the mountain fortress built up by Herod the Great. Now, as we were driving down there, again, looking at the topography, I'm like, why would anybody fight over this land? This is like Judah. When Judah gets the biggest part, you're like, oh, we're Judah, we get the best part. And then they go and they get their part, and they're like, this is terrible. Who chose this? Somebody else gets to see Galilee, and we're stuck down here with it. But here's the thing about Masada that I didn't understand. Elias also explained this to me. Because when you look at the topography of Israel, there is only one clear route that will take you from the Mediterranean Sea all the way to the Jordan River, by Masada. It's the only place to take an army all the way across to the next major waterway. Well, you don't even have that up with Megiddo. Now, Megiddo gives you one of the few areas to the mountains, the only place you can reinforce by the sea, but eventually you come over and you hit another mountain chain. It won't let you all the way across. Masada's the only one. And that's why it was built up, and that's why it was fought over. Herod the Great had his fortress there. The Romans will eventually take over it. But then in the Great Revolt around 70 AD, about 72 AD, something like that, baby, is when the Romans come. You see this kind of weird outline in the back? That is one of 10 Roman camps around Masada. What the Romans then did is they built a stone wall all of the way around it. And when those in Masada saw it, they said, we have no chance. And that's when they took their own lives. It was amazing to see the scope of that picture. Does not do justice to it. But off here to the side is a tiny little amphitheater. It's not tiny. It's an amphitheater. And it's so tiny, it looks like you could fit 100 inside that one Roman legion camp. It was really powerful. And what it was powerful for is, especially because we were there after October the 7th, what is the promise of Masada? Why do they take every class that's graduating in the IDF and to go and take their places on the front line? Why do they all take them there to Masada? Never again. And one of the things that we came to understand that they did such a good job of explaining to us, that when we saw the hurting hearts of the people, is for the people of Israel, they feel like the promise of never again was broken. It was broken on October 7th. They left places all over Europe to escape those who would come and break into your home and kill and rape and kidnap. And then what happened in October 7th? The exact same thing. And there was just devastation to their hearts. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is after that devastation happened, they were all alone. All the people that said, we'll come and we'll come alongside you, we'll pour into you, we'll love on you, they were all gone. It was inconvenient for them. It was inconvenient for them. This is one of the incredible parts of being able to sit there and understand a little bit more about the Jewish mindset. Now, from here, we got to go to, if I could only pick one, what was my favorite, En Gedi. And there's going to be a lot more pictures on this part because it was my favorite, and I did the slideshow, so you have to watch my pictures. Now, when we went to En Gedi, we understand, okay, this is where David went to run and hide from Saul. His stronghold, right? So I had all kinds of images. I'm like, oh, it's going to be well defended. It's going to have good places for food and water and all this kind of stuff. And you walk up there, and it's more rocks. All you see are rocks everywhere. I'm like, why are there so many rocks all over the place? Well, as we were there, we got to have just a beautiful Bible study. Several of these places we did, it was just gorgeous. And we're sitting here, and you're under the shade, and you understand why Jonah was so mad when the plant dried up and he had no more shade. Because it's hot. Even in February, and it was 65 degrees, and you're like, it was 8 degrees here. I got it. All right. But it would get hot in the sun there. When you had the shade, it just felt so many degrees cooler. And you're like, if I didn't have any shade, I'd be so grumpy right now. But it was beautiful. It was really, really neat. And it connected me so much to the stories about David there's a place where you can go to a lower spring, a lower little waterfall area, and Kendra went down there and checked it out. It was pretty cool. But then there was another path, and you have to pick one, so I went on the higher path, and it's to go up towards the not the Gihon Spring, the Spring of David Spring, in Getty Spring. And as you're going up there, the word in Getty, N means spring, Getty means kid, like a kid goat, a baby goat, right? And so we saw ibex everywhere. I cut all those pictures out so I wouldn't have too much, but there were goats everywhere. They're just like standing on signs and pieces of furniture. I mean, everywhere you look are these goats. And as we're going up there, and you're like, how are they surviving? Because all this is desert rocks. And there's some green plants here, but I wouldn't want to eat this stuff. What's going on? And then I come around a corner, and I see this. And it's a beautiful stream running all the way through. There's rocks on either side of it, dirt on either side of it, dust on either side of it, but then there's this spring running through. And it's just gorgeous, and it goes into, it might be kind of hard for you to see, there's little kids playing in a pool at the end of the spring. Like I'm coming around the corner, and we're in the desert, and some kids are coming out with swimsuits, and they're all soaking wet. I'm like, what happened to you? They're in there, and they're just joyous, and they're playing, and they're laughing, and they're having a great time in the pool. It was just awesome. And this is just a big shot of Engedi, this canyon coming down, and you understand, I see why David ran here, how well defended you could be. Now, what's neat is on Engedi, when you're in the front, over by the coffee shops, there is a sign that says, giving the history of Engedi, how it was the archaeological process for it. And they were like, and people have been coming here for generations. And what they had was a picture of each generation and folks that had come out there. And so there's these black and whites going way back. And then the photo for the 80s was this. That's Pastor Chuck. That is Pastor Chuck that God used to give birth to the Calvary Chapel movement. And he's the picture for the 1980s. It was really, really neat to see that history and connection for us going back there. From there, we went to Qumran, so that's where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is cave number 4. They're ordered in the number that they're found, but the one closest to the living quarters for the sect, the Jewish sect that was there, was cave 4, so it's the one that's most accessible, and it was kind of neat. What was interesting to me is you look at that, and you're like, how'd they get to there to dig that cave out? I mean, there's no stairs, and there's no ladders going as tall of it. Some of them were really high up. Apparently what they did is they would rappel from the top, and they would sit there and dig it out until they had a little place to dig, which I found pretty interesting. We got to go to the Dead Sea. It was really neat, really pretty. It is drying fast, so if you want to go float in the Dead Sea, you need to come with us quick because there's not going to be much left soon. And, of course, the obligatory floating in the Dead Sea, which it was neat to float. I mean, it's interesting, but the interesting part is when you went to stand up and all of a sudden your center of gravity was just moving on you and you couldn't get your feet to go down, so you'd have to kind of to lean over to get your feet down. So that was funny, and we went back to Jerusalem and the ever-present reminder. The hurt and the pain of the country, bring them back now. The next day, we got to go to the Temple Mount. Now, the reason that we didn't do it the day prior was because it was Shabbat. And Orthodox Jews react quite violently if you try to go to the Temple Mount that day. But we got to the next day. It's Sunday now. We're going up there. And this is a photo from the Temple Mount. You know what you don't see? Anyone. It was us. It was the Muslim Authority. And that is it. There was nobody there. Guys, I can't stress this enough. There was nobody there. Do you understand how alone Israel feels in a time like this? There's nobody to pour into except for us and you, because you poured into it. The blessing that you have been able to be to that place. But because you loved us and you wanted to send us and you knew that it would be great for our edification and for the church. And just to see what God has done, what he is doing in our church, what he's doing in our hearts. Everywhere we went, they were glad to see us. They would run to us, and we would just be walking down, and they would run up and go, "Where are you from? Where are you from? We're so glad to have you." It was really interesting because we were the only group. We had the personal attention of the Muslim monitors there. It is not a good feeling. But we got to see Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, and it just makes your heart sad. I mean, it's such an eyesore. But here's the neat thing. When we were in the western tunnels, there are several rooms that have these teaching devices in order to show how the temple was built up. And it was really, really awesome. I'll show it to you guys one time. But one of the things is they have a mock-up of the temple, or the Dome of the Rock, and the temple. And when you put them side by side, you could fit like 3 of the Dome of the Rocks inside the temple. And our guide at that time, it was Eskar, he's a Messianic Jew. He was making fun of the temple, or the Dome of the Rock, for being so small next to the temple, because it dominated it. And I'll show you something else in just a bit to kind of show it. But it was magnificent, because we were like, yeah, we know he's coming back. We know his temple is coming. And this eyesore, and it is an eyesore, will not be there forever. From there, we went to the Western Wall. It's hard for me to put into words what the Western Wall was like, because everything in it made me sad. We walked around that place. It's divided into a section for men and women. The section for the men is like twice as big as the size for the women. The women were stuffed in there. But over on the guy's side, I see these guys all wrapped up with the phylacteries and the prayer shawls and the whole 9 yards. And they're sitting there and they're doing the rocking. And they are trying to work out their salvation by effort as much as they can. And you're like, you guys are so close, but you're so far away. And you're so very lost. And our hearts were just broken for them. The chosen people, the one he chose to reveal him to. And they're just stuck in like first gear, unable to go any further. And the sad part was not the guys we see here. I have this one video of an older gentleman, and he's just sitting there and he's rocking, and it just made me cry. But that's not the part that hurt my heart. My part was the little kids I saw getting started in it. Starting in a path that will never save their souls. But so convinced that this is a way. And even at the Western Wall, it's the reminder, they're at war. Here's a soldier, fully kitted out, going to pray, because he's going to go pray every single morning at the Western Wall. Praying at the Wailing Wall, being faithful and observant to what he believes to be true. They had libraries in there for the men's side. Sweetie, were there libraries on the women's side? No, I guess just for the guys. They had all these Hebrew books for their education and learning. And this is a shot from the women's portion. I kind of had to go towards the wall and lean out, so I couldn't get real close. Behind this person is Kendra, so you can kind of see like part of her head sitting in there. But because the women's side was so small, she couldn't even get all the way to the wall. She couldn't even touch it. That's the portion that was relegated to them. This was just something interesting. In here at the Western Wall, inside the bathrooms, they have the little cups for washing your hand in the ritual way. So you fill it up with the faucet. So you're still using the faucet. And then you pour it on your hand, and then that becomes your thing, which I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. But one of the pastors went in and were like, they're drinking out of the cups. And we're like, oh, that's just gross. So there's tunnels that go underneath this section. This is Kendra at the portion that's closest to the Holy of Holies and putting her hand there. And that was really neat to be under there and to be that close to where that location was. This is us walking towards the southern steps. Now, off in the distance, you see the Mount of Olives. And it was really neat, but you see those graves. You can't not see it. But then, as we continue to go around this corner, we come to the southern steps. Now, these are known as the teaching steps. When you taught at the temple, there are 2 locations for you to teach. One are on the steps, and that's where you talk to larger crowds. The other is inside in Solomon's porch. Now, that's just inside of the doors that I'll show you in a moment. But when you were teaching to large groups, you taught here. Now, I don't know what your image is of Peter on the day of Pentecost, but in my head and like in the movies, they're all in the room and then they pray and there's room filled and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of think like he just goes out there and he starts, yelling and preaching and as loud as he can, and all these people come, right? Here's the little problem. Now that I've seen the cities, that's impossible because you couldn't fit that many thousands of people close enough for him to hear. So what would have happened? He would have went here to the southern steps. This is the location of the revival on Pentecost. He would have sat in this steps, and because it's a natural amphitheater where he is lifted up, he would have been able to speak, and everyone would have heard. And that's why it was such a commotion, because he was in the most public place. We had another beautiful Bible study. Pastor Greg, I'll show you his picture in just a second. He taught a couple times, teaching us on the sufficiency of the word, charging us, reminding us that even though we're here in Israel, the reason that all these places have meaning is because they're all built upon the foundation of the word. We don't live just by tradition, right? And we never elevate tradition above what it is that God has chosen to reveal. But what it does is it adds a richness to it. But the Word is what we build our life upon. While we were there, the gentleman on the left is Eshkar. He's the Messianic Jew that I mentioned. He was our guide. And while we were here, he sang Psalm 121, one of the Psalms of Ascent, Songs of Ascent. So this is what the Jews, including Jesus, would have sang as they walked up to the temple. Because remember, Aliyah, you're going up. And as you ascended toward Jerusalem, you would sing these psalms, and he sang one of them for us. It was really special. And the other guy is Pastor Greg. He did a great job. Yeah, and he sang in Hebrew. You're right, baby. He sang in Hebrew, and it was special. And you can tell that Pastor Greg's a Calvary Chapel pastor. Look at all his tattoos. So that was fun. When we were with the Ethiopian kids, I was wearing short sleeves, so one of my tattoos were visible, and the kids were like, "Oh, what's this? What's this?" And they're pointing at it. I'm like, "Wait, hold on. Hey, Greg." And he lifts up his sleeve, and they're all like, their eyes are this big. And then the lady's like, and he was like, "Oh, but don't do this." And we're like, "Oh, that was a bad idea. Don't listen to Pastor Anthony. He's a bad influence." So that was fun. We got to go to the city of David. There's a lot of archaeology happening there. But when we were here, this portion right around here is the foundation for David's palace. Now, the palace is gone. It's been torn down, destroyed by invaders. But the foundation is still there. And it was neat to be able to see the structures and to understand a bit what was built above it. We got to go into Hezekiah's tunnel. Now, this is one of those things where if you don't know, then you don't know, so you didn't come to good planning. So we went into Hezekiah's tunnel, and they were telling us, "Oh, no, the water's just going to come up to like maybe calf high or something like that." So I'm wearing jeans. I'm like, "Okay, well, I can go in the wet tunnel then." And then Kendra's like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yeah, they said it's only going to come right here." They lied. It was all lies. Because the first step that you take went all the way up to my hips. And I'm sitting there with my jeans pulled up to my knees, and they're completely soaked. So when I come out of it, they're all looking at me like, "You got wet." I'm like, "Yeah, because you guys lied to me and told me it was only going to come up to my calves." And they're like, "Okay, yeah, but we're going to the Holocaust Museum next." And I'm sitting there looking like this. So swimsuits for the Hezekiah tunnel if you go in the wet tunnel. But it was neat. It was neat to be able to go through it. It is 1,500 meters. It gets very thin. It gets very short. But it was cool to be able to do. But from there, we did go to the Holocaust Museum because, again, every day, we could not go a day without being reminded what the Jewish people have gone through. While the promised land is so important to them, one place where they can go and be safe. The next day, we got to go to the pools of Bethesda. It's magnificent. They are actively doing archaeology in this place. And I think you mentioned it wasn't this revealed when you went. Yeah. And it was powerful because it's another one of those places I 100% know my Jesus was there. He was at this place. The way the walls are built up all around it, and they're ancient walls in that place. There's only one way in. And we walked on that way. We absolutely walked in the place where his footsteps were, and that was really powerful. Another beautiful Bible study there, reflecting on what it is that Jesus did, just the beauty of his heart. How he comes for the one. How he comes for the one. From there, we went to the Church of the Flagellation. It was the beginning of the Via del Rosa, and it was neat. This is traditionally, because we don't have an exact biblical pinpoint for where it was, where Pilate condemned Jesus, where he turned him over to the electors to be scourged, and he was beaten. And we're like, well, we don't know, and that's true. We don't know. It could have been somewhere else. But you see this thing over here? That is a Roman game called the King's Game. It's etched into the stone inside of this little chapel right here. The way the King's Game works is it's kind of like it. You don't want to be it. And so you play the game, and whoever's it, they dress up as a fake king, and they mock you. And what did they do to Jesus? They dressed him up like a fake king, and they mocked him. That game is etched into the stone, going back thousands of years. And even if it's not the location, you're closer to it there than anywhere else. As you go through Jerusalem, you see these stations of the cross. I got a picture of a couple of them. And okay, maybe we don't hold fast to that the way that some do. But what was interesting is when you see these little markers just kind of come out of nowhere, understand how many millions of Christians have poured into that place because those moments meant something to them. It's not our job to judge whether they're saved or not. That's between them and the Lord. But there are people who have poured out all of their emotion and just been so connected to that place because of it. You can see the shops are all closed. The only shops that are open are the ones that like native people from Jerusalem would go see. So it's closed shops that sell their fashions and their types of food and whatnot, but just everything was closed. There was no place to go and really get souvenirs unless someone went and hunted you down. One of the places that we walked by, when he heard that there were tourists in the area, he went and opened up, and they were turning on the lights inside the shop as we walked by, trying to get us to come in because they hadn't had anybody. One of the guys who opened up his restaurant just so we could have a meal to eat says, I haven't seen anybody since October 7th. And it was just heartbreaking. Some locations were taking advantage of the few people who are there. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And there's a big like garbage thing out in front because they're doing work inside of it. And we couldn't see the rock that they claim is Golgotha, and I try to say that respectfully. If you know the history of this church, and I didn't, you see a tiny little ladder underneath this photo up there? It's really grainy, I'm sorry. It's the ladder that's been there for hundreds of years because like 8 different denominations own different portions of the church, and nobody can agree to what to do with it. And one time a storm knocked it over, so they built another one and put it back there because no one can agree. It's just ridiculous. Now, when you go on the inside of it, is the Holy Sepulchre itself, where they say Jesus was buried. I know for some that this place is going to have a tremendous emotional attachment. While we were there, they had this particular section is controlled by the Greek Orthodox, not by the Catholics, the Greek Orthodox. And when we were there, we had a line of their patriarchs come in, so they're all in the black robes, and one of the guys was the head patriarch, even though they're not supposed to. They're supposed to be like first among equals, all kind of stuff like that. Somebody runs up and he kisses his ring. It was really kind of weird. But their love, grace, peace was not in that group. There's a guy who stands in front of him with a big stick, and he yells at you, and he smacks you with the stick to get you out of the way. In order to go into this building, you can't see him really well, but there's a gentleman right here, a Greek Orthodox priest. He yells at you on the way in, and he yells at you on the way out. And I'm like, dude, there's nobody else here. Why can't I look for a second? But that's not the point of the place. The point of the place is this: golden, gilded worship. Again, I don't want to judge. I don't want to judge by my Western mindset and whatnot, but it was interesting. But here was the neat thing about that particular church. In the back is a room that nobody goes into. I mean, you see how old that chair is. They put it back there just to kind of get it out of the way. It doesn't go back to the time of Christ at all. I mean, it's several hundred years old. But in the back of this room is a tomb. And that's what a first century tomb looks like. Now we're standing in the room, so this is the orifice, and you see there's a front area and there's an access, and inside that access are holes like this. Now when the body of Jesus would have been prepared, it would have been wrapped up inside of strips and then put inside of one of these tunnels, almost like a torpedo tunnel. And that's where the body stays and is decayed until it's done. And then when it's done, you brought it out, you would take the bones and you put it inside of an ossuary box and then put it off to the side. And that's what a first century tomb looks like. From there, we got to go to the Hadassah Hospital. It was an amazing time. We spoke with a survivor from the October 7th attack, a nurse that put her life in danger and was shot 3 times and was still regaining the use of her left arm. She was an amazing individual. But before we met with her, this is a parking garage. When October 7th happened, in 3 weeks, they turned it into like a 120 or 180 bed hospital because this is their reality. They don't know when the next attack is coming. And there has to be a place to take all those people who are going to wounded in war and have a place to treat them. And it is a fully functional, state-of-the-art hospital that they built in 3 weeks. Why? Because their need is great. This is the reality of where Israel is at this time. Now, from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, we then go to the Garden Tomb. And this place is fantastic. Now, they'll tell you as you're sitting there and we got to have our tour with Simon. Now, this is another location. It was completely closed. Most of the guides who are there are from the West Bank or because there's a lot of Palestinian Christians in those locations. And when everything happened, Israel's not allowing them in. So they lost a lot of their guides. Several other people went back to their home countries because of the danger, and they didn't expect any tourists to be there. Obviously, there weren't, and they were closed. We didn't think we were going to get to see it at all. But a Palestinian Christian in the area made a bunch of phone calls for us. And it just so happened that this gentleman, Mr. Simon, Pastor Simon, he had an appointment that day that was going to conflict, and he wouldn't be able to open it for us, but it got canceled. And he was able to show up. And he personally gave us the tour through the area. It was just gorgeous. It was so beautiful. But what I love about it is the history of the Garden Tomb area right there is they didn't know the tomb was there when they originally purchased the property and started to do it. What they wanted was a place inside Jerusalem to declare the gospel message. And as they were building it out and preparing it, they found a tomb. Now, that tomb is so interesting because there is a place called Skull Hill, and there's another name for it, and the name escapes me. But on it is a rock face. Now, over here on the left is a picture from when it was first, I was like, Gordon's Hill. Does that sound right, Mike? What's that? No. The guy who found it. It's named after him. Gordon's Hill. Thank you. Gordon's Hill. That's what it looked like at the time that he acknowledged it. And you can kind of see maybe, squint a little bit. Maybe it. Now, here is how it looks now, and here's an eyeball in this area. And so maybe not. We don't know for sure. The Lord will tell us when we get there. But the interesting thing about this particular location is that there is a tomb. And when you go into that tomb, you see that red mark on the wall? It's been restored. But that's a Byzantine church symbol for Jesus Christ, Alpha and Omega. The early church treated this like it was a tomb, like it mattered somehow to Christ. And they had a house church near here. Now, maybe it is and maybe it's not, and they don't say that it is. They said maybe this could be. But what we do know, it is a style of tomb that went all the way back then. And at the time that Jesus was crucified, where the city walls were at that time, yes, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was technically outside those walls, but it was very close, and it was far away from any road, and that's the bigger thing. Outside of this location was a main thoroughfare through the area. The Romans didn't put you on a rock far away from the road. They put you right next to the road, so everyone could see it. And this location is the only one that has a hill shaped remotely like a skull and was close to a walkway, because the Romans wanted to make sure you knew what happened when you messed with Rome. Our last site there was this. We went to the Israeli History Museum. We showed up with like 30 minutes to go before they were about to close down. And they were like, who's dumb enough to come in here and spend all this money to go for 30 minutes? And it was like, well, us. We're the ones to do that. But we went in there just to see this. What this is a model. It's a huge model. It is a 1:50 replication of Jerusalem at the time of Christ. And that is the second temple, the second temple that was built by Zerubbabel, built up by Herod the Great. Do you see how it dominates the landscape? How everything else seems small next to it. It was the center of life. All eyes would be continually focused upon it. And it was the most beautiful and fitting way to end our time in Israel because it reminds us what it is that should dominate our life. It's the reason why we go. It's the reason why we pour into them. It's the reason why we love the Jewish people at all. Not because they do everything well or right, because their God is our God. And he loves them so much. So what did I learn? I learned that the Bible, for all its power and beauty, is in black and white until you go to Israel. And you're like, oh, well, Anthony, I don't know about all that. I'm like, well, have you been to Israel yet? Then you don't know. Because when you do, it's like Wizard of Oz, where you go from black and white and everything's in color, and that's what the Valley of Megiddo was like for us. Because it's not just a place inside of it. It's not a fact I have to memorize inside of my head. But what I learned during that time is that this is what Israel does. Israel's not a place on the map. It's not just a place of stories for me. But when you go to Israel, you learn that the Bible has a taste, it has a touch, it has a smell, it has a feel. It is vibrant in every possible way. The trip is powerful. It connects the reality of the land to the power of the Word. Going to Israel doesn't replace your reliance upon the Bible, it increases it. I can't speak for you, but I know for myself, there's been times in my Christian walks where I wondered, is this really real, or am I just believing what it is that's been handed down to me? And I know I'm not the only one who's ever felt like that, because Peter even directly touches it. We weren't deceived by the fables given to us. We didn't hear a really good story, and we decided to believe it. But we saw it with our own eyes. We testified to the glory that we got to see. And that's awesome, and we want to, be like what Jesus told Thomas. Hey, you see and now you believe. Blessed are those who don't see and still believe. But do you know how sweet it is to have been able to see him when he walked and he talked and he touched and he blessed? We'll never get to have that, not on this side of the veil. But we get this. We get to be connected to that place where everything just explodes into color. And that's what Israel does. It's not a story to me, never was. But there's something vibrant about it now that I didn't have before. And I tell you all of this and I show you all these pictures, but I'll tell you the truth. You simply will not understand unless you go. Israel has to be experienced to be believed. And I hope you'll experience with us. Because we are going back to Israel. And next February, we already have the date set. Now, this is what I want you to do. I want you to pray. It's not cheap. But don't let money be the reason why you don't take it to the Lord and trust him to be God. Because we didn't think a lot of things were possible. We were always going to get in our way. We're going to worry about those things. But it's going home. Aliyah. Going up. And guys, what I want you to do is I want you to pray, God, do you want me to go? Is this the heart that you have for me at all? And if you can't make this trip, hey, that's awesome. Our heart is, and we're praying that God will allow us that we'll take a trip every 2 years at least. And so if this one won't work, then perhaps the next one will. But we're all going to Jerusalem eventually. Revelation 21 tells us eventually he's going to build a giant house and we're all going to be there. So when Jesus goes, I go to prepare a room for you, yeah, we're all going to have rooms in Jerusalem eventually. But we're one of those generations that get to see it before the rapture, before the Great Tribulation, before all the earth is changed again. And here's the bigger point. It's one of the things that we kept hearing that I didn't really understand, and I know I'm taking up your time. I'll try to be brief. But we kept having people come up to us and go, this is historic. Your group being here, because we were one of the very first to go. The Garden Tomb, we were the second group to go into the Garden Tomb since October 7th. People that were there just after COVID says, it is more empty now than it was after COVID. Because when COVID finally lifted, then all the Christian groups who had been waiting all dived in. So they came as soon as they possibly could. Nobody wants to be there now. And if you want your love for them to stand out and to matter and to be impactful, and when you tell somebody, God bless you in Jesus' name, they listen like they've never listened to before. Because now something is just tearing the country inside out. Their hearts are just broken. And Jews from all over the world are going back to Israel. Why? Because everyone else is becoming hostile to them. And they need to know that they're not alone, that somebody else will love them in God's name. And it's us. And we got to be that. And you already did too. Because you're the ones who sent us. And now you get a chance. You get a chance to pour out to them and trust God at his promise. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. But more importantly, we know there's going to come a time when Israel will be all alone. But that day is not today. And the reason why is because these are his people, called by his name, loved with his heart. And we better hope he won't break his promise to them, because that's the same promise that he makes to us. It was special. I'm going to ask you to pray on this. And if you guys want to go with us, we only have so many slots. We kind of found what the sweet number is for the group. We don't want to be ginormous where it's just difficult to go in, but we'd like for you to go and share it with us. Because the whole time we were walking around it, we kept having this same thought. We need to bring the boys. We need to bring our sons to Israel. Because they need to have this. I lived 47 years without knowing how real this was. I'm not going to make my boys do that. They got to see this now. I want you guys to see it too. So Heavenly Father, we love you. We trust you, Almighty King, for who you are. Beautiful in every possible way. I love you and I praise you for allowing us to go. We joked if you would just hold the rapture off until we got to get to Israel. But Lord, I praise you. The experience was fantastic. So good. So rich. And my heart just fell in love with the Jewish people and Jerusalem. I understand, Lord. I understand why you chose that place. Magnificent God, thank you for what it is that you buried in our heart. And we pray, please open the door wide. For those who are already kind of worried about the finances, Lord, put them at peace. Remind them that you are still the King of the universe. If it is your will, you'll make a way for them too. But we'd like to gather all these hearts to be able to go there and to watch as they understand too. That moment, it just clicks. And it all comes so alive. I love you, Almighty King. I thank you for their patience and for their willing to listen to me during this time. I miss them so much. Please bless us, mighty God, as we go. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Kendra and I are available for any questions or thoughts that you might have. I have a sign-up sheet. I'll get it run out here. Nate, can you put this on the round table out there for me, please? If you feel like you would be seriously interested in going on it, if you would just write down your name and email on it, that way we can go ahead and start knowing who to pray for and building a mailing list so we can just keep you up to date on things as we have going, itinerary, costs, things like that. Just take it before the Lord. Bathe it in prayer. Let the King be the King, and we see what he has next. But we're available for you, but I know I have kept you guys late. I love you so much. Thank you for spending this time with me. God bless you guys.